Hello, City Life Church. Welcome once again to the conversation. Greetings from my home to yours. I hope you're enjoying coming out of lockdown and having a few more face-to-face encounters with those people who are near and dear to you. And we're right in the middle of a series now called Make Room, and it's important to make room for others, make room for relationships, make room for those people who are important to us. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about making room for Gen Z, the younger generations. And then last weekend, we really talked about those important relationships with our spouses, our life partners, and principles of building healthy relationships and making time, making room, making space to actually turn towards each other and spend time with each other. It was really great to have Allan and Helen Meyer share with us. Such a privilege to have Allan and Helen come from time to time and speak into the life of our congregation. And it's good to have you here again, Allan. Great to have you with us for the conversation. Second time this year.
Thank you, sir. No, it's a real privilege. I always enjoy working with City Life. You're a great group of people.
Yes. And really did like your message this time, as always. But just you brought out that whole aspect of the importance of face-to-face, turning towards each other emotionally, spiritually, and even physically, so we can engage with and really express value in our relationships. You drew a very strong link between the 10 Commandments and building healthy relationships. And in the message, you focused on the second commandment about not making false images. And I know I normally think of, and I think most people normally think of that as being about our relationship with God. And how do you think it relates to our relationships with each other?
This was one of those amazing little encounters that is a life changer. I was lying in bed one morning many years ago watching Channel 9 on news, and they had on that morning Shmuley Boteach, who was a Jewish rabbi doing his ministry at Oxford University. He'd just written a brand new book on relationships, and he made a comment that I'd never heard said before, but the moment he said it, it so rang true, and 1,000 different passages of scripture all just coalesced. And the point that he made was a very simple point. He said, most people don't know what the 10 Commandments are. He said they were, in fact, God's wedding vows. And the moment he said it, I knew it was true. This is an issue that's really worth unpacking in detail, but this is a very short story. The 10 Commandments were never about salvation. The law was never given for salvation. It was given because of trespasses. It was given because God was taking a nation to himself. And if that relationship was going to survive, she needed to be a certain kind of a woman. She was saved already. Israel was saved already by the blood of the Passover lamb and by the power of God. And he drew her to himself at Sinai. And there he covenanted with her to be his bride. In fact, over and over again in the scripture, for example, Isaiah 55, for your maker is your husband, the Lord Almighty is his name, the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. God so clearly saw his relationship with Israel as a marriage that when you get to Jeremiah chapter 2, and now the marriage is breaking down, which is a really vital insight, really in ministering to people. God intended the marriage with Israel to be a window to the world of the kingdom that would ultimately bring in the Savior and then open the kingdom to all nations. Through Abraham, by you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. But when you come 700 years odd down the line from the marriage at Sinai, where he drew the nation to himself, covenanted with her, the marriage is about to break up. And you hear Jeremiah speaking on behalf of God say these words, I remember the devotion of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and you followed me through the wilderness. This is what the Lord says. What fault did your ancestors find in me that they strayed so far from me? And then in the next chapter, he says, I give faithless Israel her certificate of divorce, and I am sending her away. God is a divorcee. God knows the pain of divorce. And anytime you talk on marriage, it's really important to underline the fact that while God says he hates divorce, it's a hatred that comes from experience. God has been through one. And as a result, though anyone who's been through a divorce needs to know that even God couldn't make this marriage work, because marriage requires a cooperation on both sides. And sometimes, with the best of intention, you just cannot get the response that makes it possible to make this marriage work. Even God could not make that marriage work. He gave Israel a certificate of divorce. He sent her away. And as a result, we need to recognize, just as Moses did, Moses discovered he couldn't make his marriage work. And one of the reasons that he wrote divorce into the possibility of divorce into the law, he realizes that there are times when the behavior of a party is so intolerable that even God wouldn't live with it. And so we must expect that even sometimes human relationships are then going to break down. But that then gives us a totally different approach to the Ten Commandments. They were never about salvation. They were about preservation. They were about a relationship with God that would endure and would not result in a divorce. And tragically, he couldn't find a response to just the minimal requirements for a covenantal relationship. Now, that's enough about that, but let me now come to the second commandment, because when I now take the commandments as an extraordinary paradigm of what it takes for relationships at any level to be able to last. And we're not just talking about marriage. We're talking about churches. We're talking about families. We're talking about governments. We're talking about communities. Anytime you have to have people sustaining a long-term relationship, these are the building blocks, or the essential, the irreducible minimum for relationships that can endure. And we want churches that endure. We want marriages that endure. We want family relationships that endure. We want businesses that are capable of enduring. We want governments that can endure. And when we ignore the fact that when it came to a relationship with God, these were the fundamental minimums. And if you understand the spirit of the law, they just give us great insight into what it takes for a relationship to last. The first commandment is this: you need to commit yourself, and you need a covenantal commitment. I value you so highly, I'm willing to lay down my life for this relationship. That's the first commandment. The second commandment is then do not take that relationship and disperse it or dispense it through surrogates. You bring your covenantal relationship to me, and you fulfill the righteous claims of relationship face to face. You don't run off somewhere and spill out your desire for relationship fulfillment elsewhere. You fulfill it here. And that was the essence of idolatry, that you went and you took your relational commitments to God and you spilled them out elsewhere. And the thing that perhaps focuses my attention most on this is the Ark of the Covenant, because here God gives us a piece of furniture which God saw as rightly exemplifying the nature of his own being. And here's another thought on the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are not 10 arbitrary rules. They come out of the righteous character of God. They're a reflection of his own divine righteousness and his own divine eternal being. They weren't arbitrary rules. They were a reflection of his own divine nature. And so when we come to this second one on the issue of the covenant relationship that's fulfilled face to face, you find it so beautifully expressed in the Ark of the Covenant, where God reveals himself to be a Trinitarian being who from all eternity has done life face to face. And the theological term that we've developed to try to understand that is the word perichoresis, intermingling, so devotedly connected face to face that it exemplifies who God is. And marriage, of course, is God's first and I think most extraordinary parable of eternity, so that he takes his own divine nature and now shares it with humanity. And he does that by creating both male and female, and then says, for this cause a man leaves his father and his mother and sticks to his wife, and the two shall become one. And then Paul intersects that and says, oh, just by the way, we're speaking about Christ and the church. This is not just a relationship which is intended to produce children. This is a relationship that is intended to exemplify the very divine nature of the Creator in whose image we've been formed. And because we are made in the image of God, the very things that God was looking for in our response to him is the very thing we're looking for in our response to each other, because we are made in his image. And this commandment, the second commandment, is simply an insight into the nature of what God is searching for in our relationship with him. And then when he takes marriage and he forms it in his own image and as a parable of eternity, it's what we're looking for in each other. And so I have no hesitation in building virtually everything we have to say to marriages and about long-term relationships out of the wisdom, not the letter of the law, but the wisdom of that insight to the heart of every human being, because it's what every human being is really longing for.
That's very helpful, Alan, and I hope it's helpful to the people who from our congregation listening to just understand the depth with which this theology informs your teaching, your practical teaching on relationships and marriage. As you're talking, I'm reminded of how when I travel, I often have a photograph of my wife, and I'll take that to remind me of her. But when I come home, it's a bit crazy to keep looking at the photo and the image rather than actually connecting face to face and in person with my wife.
Exactly.
So I can see the power in that theology that undergirds your teaching on this. Let's now come and begin to look at some of the practical elements that you drew out of that theology. How do we build better relationships with our life partners and with others through face-to-face communication?
Yep.
Now, not everyone might have seen your message, so why don't you give us a little bit of a summary of the practical steps that you see in building those healthy relationships?
Well, I love some of the symbols. I take the picture of the Ark of the Covenant and I just put the picture of a man and his wife facing each other. It's almost a carbon copy of what you see there in the Ark of the Covenant, that the cherubim were toward one another and their faces toward the mercy seat. And we know from the New Testament that Jesus is the mercy seat. And this golden singularity in three persons is just a picture not only of the nature of God, but of what he intended in a marriage relationship. So we then ask the question, what's the need for the second commandment? It's an important question. Why is the second commandment even there? It's interesting when you note what Martin Luther did with the 10 commandments. Martin Luther actually brought the first and the second commandments together, and then he split the 10th commandment. So he gets 10 commandments by splitting the 10th. And in so doing, I think you lose some of the importance of why the second commandment is actually there. In broken human beings, it's not easy to do relationships face to face. And the importance of the second commandment is you can make a covenantal commitment to someone and then still not fulfill the claims of that covenantal commitment, because you do simply invest your relational energy in the places that you find the easiest to manage yourself. For example, a husband and a wife, a guy goes off to work, he finds communication with a woman challenging. He finds discussions, he finds the difference between their personalities challenging, but he loves business. And he gets off on making phone calls and writing big contracts and doing, changing the world from his business. And so he'll just stay there. He'll take phone calls forever from another business guy, but trying to take a phone call from his wife, and he'll deal with that in 30 seconds. The reality is that in our broken humanity, we just don't find doing face-to-face relationships that easy. And the New Testament version, in my opinion, of the second commandment is this in Hebrews: come boldly to the throne of grace that you might find grace and mercy to help in time of need. In other words, God says in the New Covenant, come to me. Now, our tendency is not to do that. We'll run to a counselor, and that's okay. We'll run to anything that fulfills our personal needs, but we don't go to God. Because that's challenging. I can't see you. What do you want from me? I might not even like what you want from me. And this this necessity for coaching. We need to be coached in our brokenness to do face-to-face relationships really well, because we just don't find it that easy. And for the tragedy of a woman who's married to a workaholic, her cry is, well, why doesn't he come home? And he'll say, oh, listen, I went to work and I've got you a brand new car. And we're going to go for a holiday to Fiji. Well, listen, she didn't marry a holiday to Fiji, and she didn't marry the new car. And the new carpet is not a substitute for face-to-face relationships. But that's exactly what we do. We turn our business into our idol. We invest our energies over there. And the one covenant relationship that we need to give the most time, we don't do it because it's not easy. We just don't feel very competent when it comes to that. Same with our kids. Same with meeting people in a new church. It's the whole bunch of areas in which all of this flows out. But the reality is we need coaching to do covenant relationships well.
So just like we find it a challenge to go boldly to the throne of grace, in Hebrews there, to go to God, we find it a challenge to go to each other in those intimate relationships. Right. And yet that's ultimately the core almost of who we are as people. Yeah, you talked in the message, I think, really, really practically and constructively about this practice of turning towards each other to be going face to face. And you talked about the opposite to that, about turning away or even turning against each other. You used a phrase, I'd like to talk about that in a little bit more depth, but you also used this phrase about how turning towards is a positive response to a momentary bid for emotional connection. What do you mean by a bid for emotional connection? I was fascinated by that phrase, and I'd never heard it before, and I'm sure there'll be others of us who haven't heard it before, but I think there's so much in that.
Yeah. Let me frame the answer to that in putting it in this way. Helen and I have been married for 52 years. We got our 53rd coming up next year, and we've been doing this for a long time. We met each other in high school. We've done a lot of life together. One of the things that we have come to value most highly is helping people to do marriage long term. You realise that there are challenges to that. Then in the process of pastoral ministry, you realise that even amongst Christians, people who are devoted to Jesus and who love God, they can find making marriage work well. It's not that natural. And the question is why? We came across John and Julie Gottman, who are lovely Jewish people who have devoted themselves to understanding what is it that makes marriages work. What is it that makes a person a master of relationships rather than a disaster of relationship? And they've devoted themselves to creating virtually marriage laboratories in which they bring couples together and they record every conversation, every moment, the way in which they're doing their relationship in order to discover what's at the back of it all, and the whole lot of it just attunes to the 10 Commandments. It was their teaching that first alerted me to this idea of turning towards, turning away, turning against. And the moment I heard it, I realized I'm a turner awayer. That's me. I turn away. And significant numbers of the conflicts between Helen and I would be that there was a bid for emotional connection from her, and I don't recognize it as a bid for emotional connection. She just asked me a question. But in every interaction, at the core of our human heart, we are looking for the signals that demonstrate that I matter to this person. My feelings matter. My presence is valued. My desires and my longings, they're a matter of concern to this person. And the bid for emotional connection is simply an awareness that because we are created in the image of a God of perichoresis, of interwovenness, we look for the clues in our face, in our voice, in our behavior, in our choices that demonstrate that I matter to this person. And every time they see the proof of it, it simply reinforces their trust in the fact that we love them. That reinforces the idea of love. Because love is not just a theoretical idea. Love is a sense of being valued and being seen and being heard and being understood and being thought of as being worth the effort, all of that stuff. And that means that we are simply highly attuned to assessing every little moment as to whether it affirms my value or it doesn't. So bids for emotional connection could be described as another opportunity to say, I love you. It's another opportunity to show that this person is highly valued, significant to me. And as a result, we often are in situations where, I'll take an example, just one example. A couple who've become our closest friends once tried to attend another church. And they eventually came and joined our church, and then out of that became our close friends, and one of them became my executive pastor and so on. And I once asked them, how did you ever come to our church? And they said, well, we tried to join a different church. We turned up for 6 weeks in a row. And we would walk up to people and try to introduce ourselves, and they would turn away. They'd walk away. Yeah. They would give us the most cursory of greeting, and then they would walk on. In other words, it took us 6 weeks to figure out that no one cares we're here. They don't want us to be here. No one wants us. And so we tried your church, and it just worked out differently. That's what I mean by a bid for emotional connection. Just walking across a room and saying hello to a person, noticing them, is an opportunity for emotional connection. To say to them, I'm glad you're here. It's lovely to see you. And what we often don't recognize in our relationships in our home, that so many moments are opportunities for emotional reinforcement that you matter to me. And I discovered that I was a turner awayer, and it quickly got my attention. And it explained a lot of the turning against, because sometimes when your wife feels like the way you dismiss a question, or the way you dismiss a suggestion, or the way you tune out of a moment says, I'm not here for you, I'm here for me, it then creates a desperate, and this is a different principle in marriage, it causes the pursuer and the distancer. The pursuer starts to chase the emotional connection. I didn't get it the first time, I'll try again. And the second time, it gets a little more demanding. And the third time, a little more demanding again. And then the person who's being pursued doesn't like that feeling, and they distance themselves. And those you've got to pursue. And this goes to the core of a lot of marriage breakup, that you've got a pursuer, distance, a dynamic going on, and nobody's recognizing what's happening. It's all about bids for emotional connection, and the person feels it's not happening for me, and it's supposed to be happening for me. And as a result, they get desperate, and it turns into a negative cycle. And I would say that happened for us often enough for me to very quickly see the possibilities in this particular insight.
So we really do need to develop a capacity to recognize those emotional bids early on, before that vicious cycle, in a sense, starts with the pursuer and the pursued. Now, you did bring out a number of ways in which those emotional bids are expressed, like a question, a concern raised, even a hand on the shoulder, or just a glance can be that. Let's now drill down. If we are sensitive to that, and hopefully we can grow in being sensitive to those things, what is the turning toward response, and what are the negative responses? Turning away, turning against. Explain a little bit more of those.
Yeah, no, the turning is, I love that word attune. We use that. We picked that up from the Gottmans. First, theologically and practically, you've just got to be aware that every person you're relating to has similar deep needs. They need to be heard and seen and appreciated and understood. And bring it down to your marriage. The person you're married to has feelings and they have needs, and you are one of the closest possibilities for the fulfillment of that moment. So in the issue of attuning, the aim is to turn towards, because that's theologically, we're creating the image of the turn towards God. And you turn towards them knowing that you are the most available opportunity for that to be fulfilled. Then comes the second T, and here's where the skill comes in, because the reality is we're not perfect people. And so sometimes the opening moment of a bid for connection has not been perfectly framed. It wasn't said with the right tone. It wasn't said with the right intention. It wasn't the right moment. Why did you interrupt me now? And so you've got to tolerate the imperfect expressions of emotion. In other words, you've got to give each other space.
That's
to
very
be
powerful.
perfect.
Mm.
And rather than just immediately brushing them off or turning or rebuking them, trying to create a tolerance for imperfection. And then be curious about what might be involved in this. Understand where they're coming from. What are they coming from? You asked the question, and it was a little bit of a cranky question. What's at the back of that? Rather than just flaring and saying, well, that's not a nice way to say that. What's at the back of that? Be curious and try constantly with your kids, with yourselves, in meetings, try to be non-defensive. Try not for the first opening salvo of whatever's going on here, guarding your own heart or protecting your standing or sticking up for yourself, and seek to get connections emotionally. So that's where the attune comes from. The ATTUNE is a way of reminding you. Now, at the bottom line of it, it comes down to that you're going to do one of three things. You're going to turn towards, you're going to turn away, or you're going to turn against. And turning towards is that you just constantly start with a warm, friendly, engaging disposition. That's the core of how we're trying to do everything. We're trying to be, we're trying to stop, we're trying to look, we're trying to listen, we're trying to respond, we're trying to notice, and that life is an opportunity for fun rather than another opportunity to notice somebody didn't do that right. So the key is the realization that the greatest longing is for connection. Well, let's not try to turn this into something less than that. And the turning toward is actually physical. I've found this to be really helpful. In fact, in our marriage, if Helen will now use that phrase, if she'll start a question, and if I haven't turned physical, she'll say, turn towards, and I will,
right.
it's important, just turn towards, and I will stop, and I will actually stop, and I will turn face to face, because that's how you demonstrate that I've stopped.
So this has been really meaningful to you personally. I mean, you learn, you discover these principles with the Gottmans, and then you've applied these in your own marriage relationships. What's the impact of that been? Is that okay to ask that question?
There is no question that the last couple of years of our marriage relationship have been warmer than they've ever been. And largely it's because I have stopped hurting her through turning away. I act deaf. I just don't respond. If I don't like the question, I just act as if I never heard it. It's so easy, particularly with a mobile phone, particularly with all of the distractions around us, to maintain a preoccupied stance. And turning away means to physically to stop. Stop reading that. Stop checking this on your phone. Stop that. Stop watching and turn towards, look a person in the face and give them attention. And the reality is that I have made this an art form. I recognise that a lot of the opportunities that I've lost to warm her heart have simply been not from being aggressive or ugly, but just by being distracted, and that being dismissive. You partially hear a question, but you don't listen all the way to the end, and so it's okay. You do whatever you want, and it's dismissive, and dismissiveness feels to the human heart like rejection. It feels like unimportant. You don't matter. What might be your idea, but it's not my idea. So it's an immediate. It's a mild rebuff. It's not as bad as turning against, which is where it now gets criticism and contempt and all of the ugliness that goes with that. But it starts down that pathway. And turning towards has been for me really an important lesson in my relationship with a woman. One of the things we ask people when we're doing a marriage seminar, I get her to ask me, Al, what is it that you want from me? And I try to explain that. I'll say to her, Helen, what is it you want from me? And her answers come down to two things. She'll say, Alan, I need to be able to trust you. I need to know that you are who you say you are and that you'll do what you say you'll do. I need to be able to rely on you. But secondly, I want emotional connection. I want to feel like you hear me and see me and understand me and care about me. And the fact is, there are a million moments in which I can, I was going to say the word play into that, but that's like, that almost turns it into then a technique for manipulating another person, which you can do. I mean, you can learn a technique to manipulate, and maybe salesmen and maybe even lots of people learn that technique. But I'm talking, this is not about a technique. This is about understanding the nature of the human heart and then cooperating with that. There are so many opportunities in which I can lean into that need and in the process warm her heart and become more of a human being myself in the process.
As you're talking, Alan, now, and also as you're sharing the message on the weekend, as much as I could see this applying to my own marriage relationship, I could also see it applying to my relationship with my children and my grandchildren, because those emotional bids from, say, grandchildren are so easy to miss in the busyness of life and ministry or other things you want to do, that you actually miss that ability to connect with them at a face-to-face deep level. How does this apply in other relationships like children, grandchildren?
It applies absolutely everywhere. And one of the reasons that we tried not to make this message any more complex than we did was that if you can keep it simple enough, then no one can lose it just because there was too much stuff. And the reality is, here is the key to government. You know, why is America in the mess that it's in today? Is because America is learning to turn against in every situation. And in government, turn towards, listen, care, try to understand, empathize. That has almost been lost in the political arena. And it has produced the nightmare of government that is emerging all over the world, the government of relentless conflict rather than of communication, of kindness and humanity. And this is not leading us to a good place. It is the key to a great business. Anyone who realizes that people want to be heard and they want to be understood, and you can develop a mindset, not only amongst people who work in the staff, but in the way you relate to every person who walks through that door or who phones you on the phone. People want to be listened to, and there is nothing more infuriating than to think that you have a need and nobody cares about that. Nobody's willing to stick with you to try to understand what the problem is, because our big thing is we defend ourselves. It's not our problem. You've made a mistake. Don't tell me. Go tell someone who cares. And you move into the family relationship. I think from my perspective, I've never found this a difficulty with children, with babies. I absolutely love babies, and I will take every moment I can to try to elicit from them. I want to communicate with a child because I think it's one of the funniest and most delightful experiences of life. The danger gets when they grow a little larger, and now then they have there can be the tendency to kind of dismiss an age group. And I think one of the things about what you're doing here in this whole series is you're realizing that sometimes, depending on who we are, we tune out an age group. We don't listen to old people. We don't listen to the teenager. We don't listen to the 20s or the young marriage, or we don't listen to the babies. And the key to great relationships is you have to learn to listen to everybody the best you possibly can. And the same principles work everywhere. It doesn't matter who you are. Turn towards, engage. Let it be with a sense, from at least from your side, that maybe this didn't start out the best possible way, but rather than turn into a war, a smile, a little bit of humour. That's one of the things we would often do. Is if we had longer time, we'd play out what can happen when I'm watching a football match, and she'll walk into the room and say, "Oh, you always seem to be watching football." Well, you can catastrophize that. What do you mean I'm always watching football? I live in a I work hard, and I finally come. And I can turn into that. I could do the turning away. I could just pretend I don't hear. I just turn the volume up so I can hear the football over her. But I didn't want her to say that. So how do I turn towards? Well, a little bit of, oh, sweetheart. Come on, sweetheart. It's Hawthorne. Come and sit down here. I know you're going to love this. Now, you know that she's not, but I'm not going to turn this into a hostile moment. I'll turn it into a bit of fun. And then at some point, well, I'll say, well, look, sweetheart, can I watch at least the first half? Is that coming? And now we turn this into, and go, she's saying I can watch it all. She just really wanted to know whether it was more important to watch that or listen to her. And eventually, if she knows that, I can watch the whole thing through. And she might even sit and watch it with me. And it's even in intense moments, creating an environment in which, rather than immediately turning this into a defensive confrontation, there's some humor, there's some fun, there's some kindness. And so in the warmth of that, you don't lose the opportunity to say, look, I really would like to watch this footy, but I care about you too. And I don't think there's a single place in human relationships where this does not become one of the greatest keys of life. And it's why we...
And such a simple key, Alan, in many ways. Turn towards rather than turn away or turn against. But so easy to remember and so profound in its application. Thank you so much for sharing both on the weekend with Helen so transparently and during this time as well. I think you really have brought some additional theological understanding to it, and also some really practical applications there. I love that aspect of humour. Humour definitely is very important in turning towards people. Really do appreciate you, Alan. Appreciate the contribution, as I've said, to our church life over the years and this year as well. Thank you so much for sharing this powerful message with us.
Thanks for the opportunity. I don't think I have... I delight in sharing. This is one area we just delight on sharing in. And if this has been a blessing to someone, I'm just so grateful. God bless you all.
God bless.